we need to talk about Conor Benn, don't we? And the reason we need to talk about Conor Benn is his might be the first case where I've gone from hang him and flog him to let him box. And I'll tell you why. Either he's super duper uber smart or the people around him are smart. Now, they hung in this fight long enough until they found a weakness in UKAD. That could be the only reason he's been cleared, right? Because when the best anti-doping authority on the planet, in terms of strike rate and in terms of insight and knowledge, when they catch you and you don't have to serve a ban, you got a good team around you. And the fact that it took so long shows how hard they must have worked, because at any point he could have coughed and he could have just taken a slap on the wrist, and he chose not to. And, you know, from what I hear, his immediate team, as in managers and promoters, was like, look, hold your hands up, say you're trying to have a kid or whatever, and this is how it happened. Take your 6-month ban, you'll be back. And he didn't, out of principle. Now, like I keep saying, I will always stand on the VADA results because they seem the most consistent and the best. But what Conor Benn's been able to do is force some very uncomfortable questions to be kicked down the road until the next high-profile doping case, which, based on recent news, might be involving Chelsea with Mikhailo Mudryk. Don't know if I said his name properly, but yeah. That's going to be interesting when the details of that come out. But it makes sense for us to go back to the genesis of this. So, summer 2022, that's how long ago this is. Summer 2022, when we were all getting ready for, you know, the World Cup later on that year and all these sorts of things. In the summer, Conor Benn fails 2 tests for clomiphene. I think it's July and August. And he's how can I put it? He's notified of these, and the promoters are notified. Everyone's notified of this, and they decide to carry the fight on. What happens in the immediate aftermath is they get Dr. Uz in. Go and look at the timeline, right? I think it's very clear now. Dr. Uz announces himself as part of Conor Benn's team round about the time that the second test failure would have been notified. So at that point, they go, right, we're going to draw a line under this, right? That's what happens. Get to October fight week, and rumors are starting that Conor Benn's failed a drugs test, right? And initially, talking to people in the sport was like, nah, he hasn't. All his UKAD tests came back clean. Whenever someone says all his UKAD tests come back clean, you're like, okay, well, what about the VADA? And no one talked about that. So then the Daily Mail published a story, and it puts the board in an awkward position because they're saying, look, we didn't know anything about this. We weren't notified, yada, yada, yada. I think UKAD said they weren't notified. Fight then gets stopped. Okay? Fight doesn't happen. Now, after this is when everything goes crazy. And there's some uncomfortable questions from a governance perspective. Why wasn't the fight stopped? And we know it's possible now, right? Because Dennis McCann is not fighting Peter McGrail because Dennis McCann failed the VADA test. Got pulled straight off the card. Leadership. That is leadership 101. Like, I don't want any scandal affecting the biggest night in boxing. You're off, mate. We'll find a replacement. Doesn't matter who it is. Now, we have that intransigence, that kind of, we're just going to try and make this fight happen regardless and keep this hushed up, which in 2022, 2023, 2024 isn't the smartest thing to do. Once that goes now once the fight is stopped because of the doping allegations that predate back to the summer, everything requires that you now investigate, right? So there's an investigation that's run by UKAD at the domestic level, under the auspices of the board, and from a sanctioning level, the WBC, because that's who Conor Benn is affiliated to. WBC come back first and go, it was eggs, nothing to answer here. Yeah, those good. Yeah, he had it in him from what we can see, but there's contamination. And Conor Benn says, no, it wasn't down to eggs. And Conor Benn says, I've got this 270-page document that will clear me. No one's ever seen it. So clearly that wasn't the one that did it for him. And so this is the first phase of Conor Benn, right? Where it's deny, deny, deny. And he goes on Piers Morgan, car crash of an interview, all of this stuff. You see the image change, right? The beard comes off. All the wild hair and the intimidating look comes off. The Rolls Royce gets parked up. The house is no longer visible in the social media. No? It goes back to Conor Benn, the son of privilege, being out in the open in 2023. Fine. So once they've done the talking the hardest thing and it hasn't worked, now it's really about the legal machinations of trying to get around UKAD and therefore the board. And so that doesn't happen. So we get to year end and it's like, mate, you're kind of guilty. And it's good to stop at this point because people said, this is all about jurisdiction, this, that, and the third. Was he licensed? Was he not licensed? None of that stuff is relevant because if you look at the UKAD rules and therefore the WADA rules, they are minded to consider all relevant information from competent bodies. And I'll give you a good example of that. There was a boxer called Jack Eubank. I don't know if he boxes out of Kent or somewhere like that, right? Jack Eubank got convicted of selling cocaine. Never failed a drugs test in his life. Never failed the UKAD test. Never failed the VADA test. Was convicted of selling cocaine. He's serving a ban. I don't even know if he had a license at the time. Maybe he did, hence the ban. But he's serving a ban. If you remember the guy Adam Mackay on SAS Who Dares Wins, former opponent of Dom Akinlade, do you remember they found steroids on him while doing that show and he copped a ban? Right? And so that tells you that UKAD have license to look at all of these things. So they had every right to look at that VADA test and go, mate, you had clomiphene in your system on these dates. That is as close to a scientific fact as we're going to have, and we can deal with that. And so why didn't they? We'll come back to that. So it was never really about jurisdiction. It wasn't about whether he had a license, not had a license. None of these things were the factor here. And Conor Benn's team knew that, right? So initially, it gets found, he's cleared to box. Not that he didn't have the clomiphene in him. For now, he's cleared to box, yada, yada, yada. People say it was jurisdiction. It wasn't, right? It was simply about, this has always been about UKAD, by the way, right? This has always been about UKAD, where I have a feeling fingers were being wagged at UKAD. That's why Conor was cleared, not because he didn't have stuff in his system. So then there's an appeal. And the appeal is based on, no. Forget us as UKAD. This test is material, right? And so we go through 2023 into 2024 in the cycle of, call it cycle of litigation, point and counterpoint, point and counterpoint. And the board are prisoners at this point because the board can't go against UKAD and they can't go against the National Anti-Doping Panel because by law, they are bound by their rules and processes. So the board have to just go off that, right? And if you notice what's happened in the last year and a half, the board are a bit more proactive on the anti-doping stuff. Yeah, but there's only so much they can do because they don't run that process. They may help you and say, look, here are the rules, but they can't do anything else. They don't even hand out the sanctions. They're just bound by whatever decision is reached. So as we go through 2024, I'm just hearing things. And the problem with hearing things is no one can ever be precise, but hearing from people in the legal sphere and the boxing sphere, and they're like, I think Conor might be all right here. There are problems at UKAD. That's what I was hearing. Now, these are just obviously rumors and innuendos around these sorts of things. But I was hearing that there are problems at UKAD, which mean they've got to let Conor box. And I was also hearing at the same time that all the relevant parties were aware of this and they'd always been planning for a March 2025 return for Conor Benn in the UK. And I've been on message with that for months now, as you guys know. And so that got me thinking for a long time, like, hold on, what do you mean there are problems at UKAD? And that's why I think this case boiled down to a number of things. And I think the most important one is the sense that the UKAD testing regime is no longer fit for purpose. I think that's the biggest issue. And it took a boxer with enough money to get the legal muscle to really look at this in order for them to shake the tree, and then the truth fell out. And it goes back to what I said in a previous episode. If it was a testing problem, if it was a lab problem, Conor Benn could have easily sued the lab. Now, whether it's the lab in King's College London for UKAD or the one in Salt Lake City for VADA, he could have easily sued. But the problem with suing those guys is their accreditations are world class. So they've got that whole ISO 27001 kind of certification, which means you have to go through like a rigorous certification regime. Well, rigorous is relative, but you've got to go through a certification. Like, you have to be certified that we comply with these process standards, right? And they're pretty high. And I think there's a new certification that's going to come in now, and the bar goes up. And so what those labs will be able to do is show you a very clear chain of custody. Very clear chain of custody. They'll say, look, it came in on this date. It was stored in this freezer or this fridge. This person handled it. They tested it on this machine at this time. Everything is so well managed at the testing level. Because remember, these are the same labs that test you for like HIV, cancer, etc. They can't afford to get those tests wrong. Like, the liabilities are ridiculous. So they have more of an incentive to get it right than to get it wrong. So it was never going to be a lab problem. Was it ever going to be a VADA problem? No, because VADA have caught almost everyone of note. It was VADA who was catching everybody. And you're looking at USADA, you're looking at RUSADA, you're looking at everyone going, hold on. Why are VADA catching your Povetkins, etc., and you guys aren't catching anybody? Why is that? Why are VADA catching Canelo? Why aren't USADA? Why? And so we got to all of these questions. So VADA came out, and you knew VADA were in a strong position because Victor Conte was talking the hardest. If he had something to hide, I think he would have disappeared, but he didn't. Because he understood that if it was a jurisdiction question and that the findings of VADA could be ignored, he understood VADA would be finished. There would be no point in having VADA. And it's definitely not the board's problem, because the board don't administer the anti-doping aspects of this. They can't. Like, they don't have the experience, they don't have the tools, they don't have the resources to do so. So that leaves one party in this who could have screwed up, and that's UKAD. And that's always been my theory, that you're going to find the problem was with UKAD. And I went from, we have to ask questions about their testing, right? Why are they missing stuff that VADA are getting? And what we now know is you get what you pay for when it comes to testing. So if I'm spending, let's say for Riyadh season, I'm spending 15 grand per fight on VADA testing. And that's going to guarantee me 3 or 4 tests, right? Every 2 weeks, I'm able to test these guys. UKAD don't have the money to do that, right? UKAD are not spending 6 figures testing boxers. They don't have the resources, they don't have the time. They just don't have the inclination. And imagine how many misses you're going to get in that. And so when you do your end of year reporting, it doesn't make sense. So what UKAD do is they go, we need to hit metrics. And if their metrics are number of people tested and number of positives, they're going to go after people they know are cheating, or where there are hotbeds of cheating. So if you know, for example, in the Rhondda Valley in Wales, CF82, whatever, there's a lot of doping there, right? You may have intelligence that that's where a lot of steroids are sold. You're going to go down to those rugby clubs and you're going to pick people based on their build and go, right, want to test him, test him, test him. And you know you're going to get at least one hit. So your end of year reporting looks good. Boxing, you're not. There are too many sophisticated people. It's the same in football. Too many sophisticated people, too many TUEs. Your miss rate's going to be through the roof. So you're just like, I can't be bothered. We're not allocating resources to elite sport because, you know what I mean, they have the tools to avoid us. And that's why boxing brought VADA in, because we knew that people were taking drugs and they weren't getting caught. And Victor Conte was like, I'll catch him. Him and Dr. Margaret Goodman, I should say, were like, we'll get him. 100% we will get him. And you start to see people get caught. And remember, like in the early days of VADA, they were just picking them up easily because they had a more sophisticated testing regime. And what people don't understand is every year or so, they improve the testing. So they're able to detect smaller and smaller traces of these metabolites, which mean something that used to clear in 6 weeks might now clear in 6 months because of the way they've upgraded the testing. And a lot of times when people are cheating, they don't factor these things in. And it might be the case UKAD are still using the old tests that they've always used, and VADA are using the modern tests. So the fact that I think Conor Benn's sequence was UKAD negative, VADA positive, UKAD negative, VADA positive, UKAD negative, right? All in close proximity to each other. I might get those dates wrong, but the fact that UKAD were clearly missing something big and VADA were getting it was an uncomfortable question. And it was an uncomfortable question that went all the way to WADA, because all of us now, understanding the failings of this process, are now saying, what's all that testing at the Olympics then? What are they testing for? Why aren't the guys at the Olympics being tested the same way boxers are? And then the boxers are like, well, hold on. We're being tested to a higher standard than everybody else right now because of VADA. And our sports are going through the mud in terms of reputation. This isn't fair. And then look at it from the business side. Every promoter started walking away from VADA. We're going to go to drug-free sport. We're going to go to Fred's drugs testing. You know what I mean? Everyone started to find their own little thing where they're like, you know what? We can't have our guys getting caught like this. And so that started to happen. But it all comes down to clearly what Conor Benn's team have said. What's going on at UKAD where they're not getting these results? Either VADA are wrong or UKAD are wrong. And VADA would quite rightly say, look at our record. No one has ever been able to challenge or appeal a VADA result. They can say it was a contaminated supplement. That's on them. That's past our gate. But no one has ever said our testing is wrong. We can show you all the paperwork. You know? And Victor Conte has always said this publicly. We will show all of our paperwork to show you we're above board. You've never heard UKAD say that. You always hear UKAD say we're bound by confidentiality. Oh, confidentiality this, confidentiality that. But Conor's team would have been saying, hold on. Your testing's not fit for purpose. And if his team was smart, they'd start interrogating that test. And so here's my tin hat theory. Either they didn't do the test or they messed up the chain of custody somewhere. Because if you go back when Conor was like, I'm going to sue the lab, we thought it was a VADA lab he was going to sue. What if it was a UK lab? What if it was a UKAD lab? What if it was King's College where Conor was like, I'm going to go and sue those guys because this doesn't make sense? And then what he would have found at that lab was, what sample are you talking about? We don't have a record of that. And they keep records of everything. They have to. So I wonder, is the issue here that not all UKAD tests are UKAD tests? Is the issue here that testing process UKAD have broke down somewhere? And so what they said was just tell him he's passed. I don't know the answer to that, but we need to really start asking questions because they seemingly took victory from the jaws of defeat. Like VADA are beyond reproach. This whole process has shown that the one name that no one was able to question was VADA. So we're looking at UKAD now going, if Conor was going to sue a UKAD lab, then what happened? And it may be that upon investigation, it turned out the problem was with UKAD, not with the lab. And so maybe someone at UKAD's gone, this is horrible. And that means you're going to get hit with two questions. One, what's going on at UKAD? Two, why isn't your testing as good as VADA's? And then the argument might be, we do the exact same test. And it's like, well, if you do the exact same test, why are you getting different results? And it had to be something about a broken chain of custody or a sample that went wrong somewhere, even before it got to the lab. And I don't know which one it is, but that would be the line of interrogation I would have right now. Like all these guys like Adam Cattrall and Sam Jones talking nonsense on Talk Sport about stuff they know nothing about. But no one's asking the obvious question. What's going on at UKAD that this is a real problem? Because as I said before, I'm going to say this again so I'm clear. None of us have asked any questions of VADA or Victor Conte, right? Because they're like, well, we tested and got him, right? And if our results were off, he could easily come and sue VADA. He could easily come and sue the lab at Salt Lake City. Hasn't come close to doing that. He's focused on the UK. There's something not right at UKAD. And think about the implications of something not being right at UKAD. So if the UKAD process is broken, that effectively means that we can't trust the testing results or the testing framework we have in this country. And that would explain why a lot of our athletes get to take drugs. And the only reason we're not treated the same way the Russians are is geopolitics. We control everything on this side of the line. So we can throw rocks at Russia, but they can't throw rocks at us because they don't control anything. Now, look, as boxing fans, let's step away from our sport and ask a question. What would happen if we gave every sample from 2012 till now, every Olympic Games from 2012, 2016, 2020, 2024, if we gave VADA all of those samples and a pot of money and said, test them with the best testing framework you can come up with, what would happen, do you think? I think we all know what would happen. A lot of medals would get redistributed. If we allowed VADA to do their job on those samples, a lot of stuff would get redistributed. Those golds would move, the silvers would move, the bronzes would move. And what would end up happening actually is we'd realize every sport's dirty. Men, women, para athletes, all of that would all be dirty to the point where you would kill sport. And I think this is the conversation that happened. WADA have gone, this is bad. This is really, really bad. Our best case scenario is we keep VADA at the fringes. So people don't know what VADA is, and no one is saying, why don't we just test with VADA instead of WADA, right? They're trying to keep alive as an organization because these are really uncomfortable questions. Like you can't miss, over the course of 2 months, you've missed clomiphene, like the most basic compound to test for. But why? Because it's pharma grade normally. Like there's no real point in trying to bootleg clomiphene. It's a cheap drug to buy. Why would you wouldn't, right? So it's pharma grade. They should have a test for that easily, and they should catch that. And they didn't. And so why have probably gone to UKAD, look, we need to walk away from this because if they keep pressing, we're going to have to submit documents and that's going to get awkward. And so I think that you will find that there's chronic mismanagement at UKAD, and maybe in the next 12 months or so, we'll see the names on the door change as a result of this. But there's definite issues there around how they're missing these guys. And then as non-boxing fans, we're now looking like, so what does this mean for the Premier League? What does this mean for rugby union? What does this mean for rugby league? And the reason I say that is if you go through the list of UKAD violations, go and look at how many rugby players are getting caught. None of them at that professional level. None of them are internationals. And I'm supposed to believe that these guys playing for Hunslet, I don't even know what other team, Lee RMI, that might be a football team though, so don't quote me on that. Gosforth, all these sort of random northern towns, Cleckheaton, right? There you go, there's a good name for you, Cleckheaton. Let's assume that these guys are getting caught. I'm supposed to believe that they're the only ones taking and the guys at the top are just naturally gifted, even though the guys at the top do twice the work. No chance. Yeah? And you look at it, British weightlifting. None of our Olympians are popping for drugs, but like seemingly every other amateur is failing for not just one drug. It's normally like 4. Like they'll have test in there, nandrolone, growth hormone, whatever. right? And these are guys who aren't as good as our elite guys. And so, as non-boxing fans, we're now looking at our sports going, all these guys are cooking. And this is a UKAD problem because they're not supposed to be cooking. So now we start looking at what are UKAD doing? Oh, we're doing the best we can, but we've only got 3 people in the office. How much more money do you need to test? And then we'd see that number and go, oh, that's a lot. Oh, how about we don't do it? And this is what athletes gamble on. The fact that you couldn't have a regime that could catch everybody. So as long as you're far enough away from that net, you're normally okay. So let's say you train somewhere where it's expensive to get to you. Malta, for example. Maybe Portugal. Or maybe you go out to Tenerife for a training camp. Yeah, UKAD aren't flying out because they're like, well, just to test that one guy in Tenerife, we could test 4 rugby players in the valleys. Or 5 or 6 rugby players in the valleys. We're going to do that instead. It's better for our numbers. And so that's why you're seeing boxers go to all these sorts of places. And so when it comes to the Conor Benn thing, I think he's allowed to box. And I say he's been cleared to box. Because remember, we still don't know where the clomiphene came from. But we know it was in his system because no one has ever challenged the VADA finding. So we know the clomiphene was in his system. But he's been cleared to box. So it's an administrative decision that's been made here. And I think it's come down towards the anti-doping panel, the board, everyone that said, guys, look, if we carry on with this, we're going to do irreparable damage to British sport. Can we just find a way to resolve this? And that's why I said March 2025. They've been trying to find a way for everyone to save face. But before that, they had to go through the process of what went wrong, in case someone asked these uncomfortable questions at a higher level. And so that's where I think we're at now with Conor Benn. Conor Benn was cleared because he revealed that UKAD is rotten to the core and that you can't trust anything that comes out of UKAD. And so if you can't trust anything that comes out of UKAD, even UKAD trying to consider the VADA test is problematic, and you can't trust that. But the root of this distrust is from the fact that they can't catch the people VADA are, which is either down to inadequate custody or inadequate testing. And the thing that convinces me that has to be the argument is the fact that Conor Benn has been 100% silent on this. Remember, in this situation, there are only 2 parties. There's Conor Benn, and then there's the board under the auspices of UK Anti-Doping, which includes the National Anti-Doping Panel. So when you talk about confidentiality, it's either meant to protect Conor Benn, but he's already been public with the situation. So he hasn't really been very quiet about his position, or is to protect the other side. So the reason, because think about it, if Conor Benn had been found, well, look, there was no clomiphene in his system, beyond a reasonable doubt, no chance in hell, he had nothing in his system, his blood was pure, he's never cheated, he'd have come out and told you that. He'd have said, look, in that whole thing, this is what they found. They found that I have never cheated, right? He would have come out and said that because that would have repaired his whole reputation. The fact that he hasn't leads me to believe that he's being quiet for someone else. And so the deal was, you can come back in March, just don't say why you've been cleared. We're going to clear you, do not say why. They need to unseal that verdict so we can understand what happened in this case. They need to. And as fans, we should be calling for that to be unsealed. We want to see the whole verdict. We want to see all the paperwork for that. I believe Conor Benn will be happy to submit the paperwork. I just don't believe the other side would. That's my worry. My worry is they exposed how rotten UKAD are. Here's why this is important to me. One of the things I always promised on this pod was I'd help fans become better informed about boxing, or sport in general, actually. But it was about sharing information. Some of it you can't share because you can ruin someone's business, someone's life, and that's not fair. But I can tell you, Premiership level rugby union players who are taking all sorts of compounds, growth hormone, small doses of stuff like masterone, small doses of testosterone, all the sort of stuff that they're taking, right? Like real scientific applications of what they're doing. I can tell you when they take him, it's mostly before the season starts because you know you're not really going to get tested then. So a lot of guys will do that and then just hang on to whatever gains they make in the off season. Happens a lot in rugby. Happens a lot with the women as well. Like a lot of women are on low levels of testosterone. Even if they get it to the top of the reference range for women, for a lot of women, that's quadrupling their natural testosterone production. And that's with a TUE, that's without a TUE, not failing a test. People generally don't test for the women's side of the sport anyway. And you imagine you're a woman on the come up. Let's say you're studying at, I don't know, Bath University. And for the 3 years of your undergrad, you're just on this stuff and you're just lifting in the gym, powerlifting, etc. You might play a bit of social rugby. You finish uni like I'm going to take rugby seriously. But you've already accumulated all the advantage you need to fly through the ranks. Happens a lot. British powerlifting, riddled with it. You don't compete without it. When they tell you they're natural, they're lying. What they're saying is, I'm not going to fail a test. I'm not saying, they're not natural. Same with bodybuilding. Yeah. But then there's stuff like sprinting. They're not clean. And you can go through all of these sports, swimming, lacrosse, all of these sports. If you tested people en masse with VADA standard testing, a lot of these guys would fail. If you've ever been on these like kind of 10Ks and stuff, you'll be surprised at the number of people who are taking stuff that's banned. Yeah. No, it's not just high dosing on caffeine. It's stuff like, low doses of ephedrine, etc., just to give you that extra 20% when you need it. There are people amateur cyclists on EPO. Like, ego's a crazy thing. And so this is why it's worrying. Like, if we create a culture of mass doping in society, and we have mass doping in society, like, go and look at the cars that some of these guys drive who supply the drugs. Do you know what I mean? Like, they're living nicely because, the stuff is valuable. But we're living in an era of mass doping in society. And what that did is it brought the casual athlete closer to the clean athlete. And so the clean athlete's like, no, we need the differential or we're not going to get our money. And global sport realizes if we don't have a freak show here, the public are going to get too close and not respect what we do. So there's almost like a handshake agreement of, look, people are going to dope, just try not to get caught. You see it in stuff like the CrossFit Games. There's like a Wadapalooza the other day. It happens. Like, even in the calisthenics world, people are doping. At MMA, like, it's so rife now that if we don't maintain this pretense of clean sport, people are just going to stop believing. And when that happens, sport's done. And that's where we're living right now. And as boxing fans, we just have to accept that most of the people you watch on TV are taking something. And if they're not, they're stupid. It's as simple as that. Look at Dennis McCann. Dennis McCann's a featherweight. Dennis McCann is a featherweight, and he's getting caught doping by VADA. And it seems in that kind of northwestern corner of the country, there's a relatively mature doping operation that happens. Because it's an odd place to live. It's an odd place to be. If you have money, like staying in certain places, I'm not going to name them because, I end up having to explain myself in public. But it causes concern. And then we look at some of these doctors involved in the sport. And let me just say for the record, I have no issue with Dr. Uz. Dr. Uz is not a registered athlete. Dr. Uz is not required to keep other athletes safe. He has no requirement to maintain the integrity of sport. Dr. Uz is a man who needs to make a few bob. Okay? And he does nothing different than Liverpool's club doctor, Arsenal's club doctor, Real Madrid's club doctor, Barcelona's club doctor. He does nothing different. So when I see him getting criticized, I'm like, no. You guys are angry at the wrong person. Yeah. Be angry at the names in his bio. Be angry at the people in the photographs with him. Why is it no one's asking questions of them? It's Dr. Uz, hammer Dr. Uz. Dr. Uz has done nothing wrong. In the Conor Benn situation, they called Dr. Uz, can you help this guy not fail a test, please? In other situations, I know they've gone to Dr. Oz and said, look, he needs more power. Or we need to get him up a weight class and do it the right way. How can we do that? Dr. Oz is there. He provides a service that boxers shouldn't be asking for. But he's allowed to provide that service. They shouldn't be asking for it. So I have no issue with Dr. Oz. I genuinely don't. He's a knowledgeable guy. And he's never really hidden what he does. But because we have favorites, we don't want to talk about him. Because we know his links to Tyson Fury and we know his links to Joseph Parker, we don't want to talk about him. That's up to you guys as boxing fans to talk about those names that have been in his bio repeatedly. There are loads of names. It's obvious. And then also just track all the people who mysteriously ended up at Liverpool. Just all seem to gravitate towards Liverpool to train with a couple of guys who have a combined age of probably less than 75. Why would you do that? No track record. If I was UKAD, I'd just focus on the Northwest for now and just find all the cheats in the Northwest. And then I'd go over to Yorkshire. Then I'd come down south. Let's not act like the Midlands is anywhere near pure, because they've had their kind of boxing revival of stuff where I'm like, what's going on here, people? Right? Are we ever going to clean this up? I don't know. But we shouldn't hammer Dr. Oz because he's not the problem. The names in his bio are the problem. And if you look at it big picture, Conor Benn quite rightly is like, I am not the only one taking this stuff. And I'm sure there were points where he's like, I could name all the guys taking. I can guarantee he was getting to that point of frustration and anger where he would have just named names. I reckon if Conor Benn had got a 4-year ban, he would have named names publicly and said, all these guys, go and investigate them. And that would have been his poison pill to boxing. And that might have also been a factor in, like, look, just let him box again. But we know that at that top level, they're all cooking. I'm going to ask you something as boxing fans. Why would Louis Edmondson be on Dr. Oz's list of clients? Like, if Louis Edmondson's on that list, what does that say for all the people above him in the country? What are they doing? Because Louis Edmondson, whatever you want to think about him today, is a talented boxer, is an experienced boxer, is a guy that knows how to train his nuts off. The fact that he needs to talk to Dr. Oz to, who knows, man, maybe find another level. That's a worry. But here's the ray of sunshine. Riyadh season might change all of this. And that's the hope, right? Because once McCann failed, he was off the card. There wasn't we'll try and sneak him on, we'll do this, we'll do that. It wasn't. The fight was off. If the Saudis are of that view of as soon as you fail a drug test, you're off, is it worth the risk? You'd sooner lose and take the money. But just from my understanding now, this could be a new era of zero tolerance to that. Because think about this. When you're trying to merge sport and politics, what you don't want is scandal. And when you're the Saudis and you already have to deal with these human rights questions, how women are treated sort of issues, all those things you have to already deal with. You're like, what I don't want to do today, people, is I don't want to deal with drug cheats. So you fail a test, you're off. Go and sort it out. We might look at it. If you come back clean, we'll look at it later, but you're off for now. We'll replace you. If that's the new model, awesome. Yeah? Because that's what should have happened from the start. And between Hearn, Sowell, and whoever, they're the ones who caused this model of, we'll see what we can do. Because every time on a Matchroom show or Matchroom affiliated show, it was always, get the lawyers in. Yeah, the show must go on, get the lawyers in. And I'm glad that era could be over now. Because look, We saw on Sunday night what happens when the testing's a bit more rigorous. Performances start to dip. And I wish people understood this. Like, what you see on TV over a 12-round fight for a world title shouldn't be possible with the physique some of these people have. They shouldn't be. And because so many are at it now, I felt for Conor Benn, because I'm like, Conor Benn's probably not even the worst offender. And I've said the same thing about Joshua. I don't believe Joshua's the worst offender. I genuinely don't. I think Anthony Joshua's always been genetically gifted from a physicality perspective. He's always been genetically gifted. Like, this isn't a guy who needed to be taking like a gram of testosterone and 300 milligrams of Tren to get that physique. Other people would need to. He wouldn't. Do you know what I mean? Like, look at Fury. What is it? Fury popped for Nandrolone. Didn't see that in his physique. You hear it in his voice. All this getting punched in the throat stuff and whatever. But you hear it in his voice. Like, that's definitely the Nandrolone voice. And it's the Nandrolone voice because when you talk to a lot of those kind of rugby league players of my generation, no, I was going to name names. Let's not do that. Listen to their voices. They all sound like they got the Nandrolone voice. And in the old days when women didn't know better about compounds, a lot of those women that were taking Nandrolone, their voices flipped as well. It's a lot different now for women because I don't think women really touch Nandrolone anymore. Although weirdly enough, they've now moved towards Tren, which is why you're seeing a lot more mental instability in those sort of power sports. But that's what I would say in terms of, where we are in the sport. Like, maybe the genie's out the bottle. I don't know. No, apologies. There's nothing worse when you're recording than someone calling you up for no reason, just talking nonsense, and it disrupts your thought process. But I just want to come back to this point about where we're at now. We've had so many people talk, and you guys have allowed this to happen. Guys like Simon Jordan, who has no clue about doping. I don't care what this guy jumps on when it comes to Wikipedia or, where guys steal their little talking points of what I say on here. They don't get it. Adam Cattrall, but he's just clueless anyway, man. Like, the guy's like just a bonehead, isn't he? Yeah. Just look, like I said, when it comes to boxing, we've got the wrong people in positions of visibility, right? We just have. And they've distorted this discussion. This was always a discussion about UKAD. Conor Benn was kind of the sideshow. This was always about UKAD because the question was always, why weren't UKAD catching people? Why weren't they? If we can jump on Dr. Uz's bio and see who he works with, they're your first 5 people to test at random. Why don't you? Maybe it's because they don't have licenses here. I wouldn't be surprised if these guys are boxing on fruity licenses. And so we need to start having a principle that British boxers fight on British licenses. I think the board need to have that principle of, we won't approve your fight. If you're a British boxer on a foreign license, we will not approve your fight. See how quickly the game changes. But then why don't the board do that? Because the promoters will take the shows elsewhere. Everyone's just trying to get paid. And that's why, as you look deeper into this, Conor Benn's not the big issue. UKAD are the big issue. The promoters being able to do what they want when they want is a big issue. The lack of regulation on these promoters is important. We should be able to stop these guys because we're not in the EU anymore. So it's not like they can just run off to Luxembourg and have a license there and go, right, we're going to do shows in the UK. It doesn't work that way anymore. We can actually use the board now for leverage and say, do you know what? It's a condition of your license that all British boxers must have a British board license. And you have to make sure that's true on all of your shows. There can be no British boxers fighting on Irish licenses. Don't care. No exceptions. And that should be allowed because it shouldn't be restraint of trade. And what you'd find quickly is who really wants to bend the rules, because people would claim foreign citizenship like that. Suddenly people become Portuguese nationals, Spanish nationals, French nationals, and they'd fight off those licenses, knowing full well they could live in the UK and not really get tested. And that's what you're seeing now. And that's not a good situation to be in. But I realize I've just talked for ages on this, but I wanted to talk about the Conor Benn thing, draw a line under it, and hopefully not talk about Conor Benn until he fights again. But I just felt that there was so much nonsense and misinformation in that public domain. And that's why I'm going to defend Eddie Hearn, because like Hearn's had to deal with a lot of silly questions about this. But the truth is, this is less a Conor Benn issue, more UKAD issue. Why isn't our testing as good as VADA's? And how can we get our testing to be as good as VADA's? What will that cost? And as fans, do we want to pay for it? Because we're either going to pay for it at the gate or in our taxes. That's really what this boils down to. So yeah, my view all the way back to square one. My view on Conor Benn has switched from hang him, flog him, all the way to, let the kid box. And I didn't think that would happen. So yeah, God, I can't believe I'm just pushing these out, man. I'm pushing these out like babies on Schermsdale. Wow. As always, if you enjoy the pod, please share it. Make this a Christmas present to someone who doesn't listen to boxing podcasts, because we're the ones who state how it is, and like it should be. And on that note, I'll say take care, guys.